You did not arrive here by accident. You came because something inside you is done pretending. Done pretending that time decides. Done pretending that circumstances have authority. Done pretending that you are small, late, or at the mercy of things you cannot touch. Tonight, you are not here for motivation. You are here for a shift so subtle it changes everything. Because there is a moment, quiet, invisible, when the impossible stops being a wall and reveals itself as nothing more than a room you forgot you could walk out of. And before this journey ends, you will understand why nothing you desire has ever been withheld, only postponed by the state you were standing in. There comes a point in every conscious life where waiting becomes heavier than pain. Not waiting in the obvious sense, not waiting for a message, a breakthrough, a sign, but waiting internally. Waiting to feel safe, waiting to feel chosen, waiting to feel allowed. This is the exhaustion Neville Goddard spoke of without naming it directly. The fatigue of a consciousness that is desired long enough to realize that desire alone does not move reality. Because waiting is not neutral. Waiting is a state, and every state has consequences. When you wait, you quietly affirm that fulfillment is elsewhere, in the future, in another version of you, in a condition that has not yet been met. And the world, obedient as it always is, mirrors that posture back to you. Not because life is cruel, but because life is precise. This exhaustion you feel, the subtle, "I can't do this anymore," is not failure, it is graduation. It is the moment consciousness begins to reject the role of observer and prepares, often without words, to become the source. And here, gently, without force, something begins to loosen. You stop asking, "Why hasn't it happened?" and begin to sense a deeper question rising instead. Who am I being while I wait? That question is dangerous in the best possible way. Because the moment you ask it honestly, the impossible starts to tremble. Let this land slowly. The impossible has never been a fact. It has always been a state maintained long enough to feel solid. Every impossibility is sustained by memory, by repetition, by emotional evidence gathered from past outcomes and accepted conclusions. The mind, trained to survive by comparison, looks backward before it allows itself to believe forward. And when it finds no reference point, it labels the unknown as impossible. But consciousness does not require precedent. Creation does not consult your history. The present state you occupy, not your past, not your logic, not your explanations, is the only thing reality responds to. And as long as consciousness remains positioned as someone looking at limitation, the world will continue to agree. Not as punishment, as coherence. This is where the first fracture appears in the old belief system. Because when you realize that impossibility is not a verdict, but a location, something extraordinary becomes available. You can leave, not physically, internally. And that movement, subtle, silent, unannounced, is the beginning of assumption. But before we go there, pause with me for a moment, right here. Before understanding, before technique, before explanation, acknowledge something honestly. What are you choosing to stop waiting for? You don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify it. Just recognize it. And if it feels right, let this be your declaration, not to me, but to yourself. Comment one short sentence that completes this phrase. I no longer wait for blank. No performance, no drama, just recognition, because recognition is power. Now we move deeper. One of the greatest misunderstandings on this path is the belief that you must understand how something will unfold before you are allowed to occupy the end. But the desire to see the how is not wisdom. It is the old identity attempting to stay in control. The how belongs to the rearrangement of states, not to the analytical mind. Every time consciousness demands a roadmap, it quietly declares, I am not there yet. And as long as that declaration stands, the end remains hypothetical. Neville was uncompromising here. You were never called to foresee the bridge, only to stand on the other side. The end does not require your supervision, it requires your occupation. This is where many people struggle, not because assumption is hard, but because they confuse it with wishing. Wishing keeps distance alive, assumption dissolves it. To assume is not to fantasize, it is to inhabit, to think from, not of, to feel from, not toward, to respond from a solved identity rather than a seeking one. When you inhabit a state, it begins to inform your reactions, your interpretations, your emotional defaults. Not loudly, not theatrically, quietly. You stop bracing, you stop rehearsing disappointment, you stop scanning the environment for confirmation. And here comes a truth that surprises most people. The first sign you have assumed the end is not excitement. It is relief. Relief is the body recognizing resolution before the mind can explain it. Relief is the nervous system standing down from surveillance. Relief is consciousness stepping out of anticipation and into presence. And relief is dangerous to old realities, because the moment relief appears, waiting dissolves. But understand this carefully and let it settle deep. The external world does not update instantly. Reality lags. What you see now is an echo, a delayed broadcast of states previously occupied. And this is where most people sabotage the process. They touch the end internally, then turn back to the world for proof. And the moment they do, they abandon the new state and re-enter the old one. This is not a failure of faith. It is a misunderstanding of timing. The world does not confirm what you are now, it confirms what you were, which means that the absence of evidence is not contradiction. It is alignment in progress. Persistence, then, is not repetition. It is remaining. Remaining when the mind wants to check. Remaining when appearances tempt reaction. Remaining when impatience disguises itself as practicality. Persistence is stability, and stability creates dominance. Reality does not obey fleeting intentions. It obeys the dominant state. The one you return to when no one is watching. The one you rest in when nothing is happening. This is why effort often delays manifestation, because effort implies distance, and distance is a state. The most powerful shift occurs when you stop asking life to change and quietly change where you are standing within yourself. When you stop requesting and start remembering. Because at the deepest level, assumption is not becoming someone new. It is remembering who you are when you are no longer negotiating with limitation. And here is where the impossible truly begins to lose its authority. When you stop treating it as a verdict and start using it as a thermometer. Every time you think, that can't happen, you are not discovering truth, you are identifying your current position. And positions can be changed, effortlessly, silently, decisively. In the next movement of this journey, we will step into the most misunderstood part of this work, the moment where consciousness must remain faithful without emotional fireworks, and why neutrality is often the final doorway before manifestation. Because what happens next is where most teachings stop, but where real transformation begins. And once you see it, you will never wait the same way again. There is a moment after relief arrives when nothing seems to happen. No fireworks, no dramatic confirmation, no sudden shift in the visible world. And this is where the old identity tries one last time to reclaim authority. If this were real, something would have changed by now. It suggests action, correction, effort, vigilance. It tempts you back into movement, not inspired movement, but anxious movement. But what you are learning now is subtler than action. You are learning stillness with authority. Because the state of the wish fulfilled is not loud. It does not argue with appearances. It does not explain itself. It does not chase reassurance. It simply is. And when consciousness rests there long enough, something profound begins to occur. The emotional charge around the desire dissolves, not because the desire disappeared, but because it no longer defines you. This is where many people become confused. They think neutrality means loss of faith. They think calm means detachment. They think peace means giving up. But neutrality is not indifference, it is ownership. When something truly belongs to you, you don't obsess over it. You don't constantly check on it. You don't rehearse conversations about it. You live from it. This is why Neville insisted that feeling is the secret. Not emotion, not excitement, not intensity, but the feeling of naturalness. Naturalness is the signature of a state that has been assumed. When the extraordinary feels ordinary, reality begins to rearrange. And here is the paradox that confuses the rational mind. The less you try to make it happen, the more space you give it to happen. Because effort belongs to the old state, the state of not having. The new state moves without effort because it is not trying to arrive. It is already there. This is also where discipline takes on a new meaning. Discipline is no longer about repeating techniques or forcing thoughts. Discipline becomes selective attention. What you give meaning to, what you react to, what you let define the moment. Every reaction is a vote. Every interpretation is a declaration. And when you understand this, you stop fighting doubt and start outgrowing it. Doubt is not an enemy. It is a signal that you momentarily slipped back into an old identity. So you don't wrestle with it. You don't analyze it. You don't try to eliminate it. You simply return. Return to the posture of someone for whom the matter is settled. Return to the emotional baseline of relief. Return to the quiet knowing that does not require validation. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, this state becomes dominant. Dominance is not intensity, it is frequency. It is the state you default to when nothing is happening, and reality has no choice but to follow. Not because you command it, but because it reflects coherence. This is the point where asking fades away. You stop asking life for permission. You stop negotiating with time. You stop pleading with circumstances. Not because you are arrogant, but because you remember where causation lives. Pleading belongs to spectators. Assumption belongs to creators. When you stop asking, something inside you stands up straight. You don't rush. You don't force. You don't explain. You move when moved. You speak when spoken through. You act when action feels obvious, not urgent. And this alignment creates a strange effect. Things begin to meet you. Opportunities, conversations, insights, decisions. Not dramatically, naturally. This is why manifestations often feel anticlimactic. They arrive as if they were always on their way. Because in truth, they were. They were simply waiting for you to stop standing in the wrong place. Now pause with me again. Just for a breath, notice how your body feels right now as you listen. Is there less urgency than before? Less tension? Less internal argument? That easing is not coincidence, it is recognition. And recognition changes states faster than effort ever could. This is also the moment where commitment deepens, not to a desire, but to a way of being, a way of living from the inside out. And if you feel that pull, the sense that you're ready to live from assumption rather than hope, this is where structure can support embodiment. Many people choose at this point to stabilize this state intentionally, to live it daily, gently, without force, through the 21-day challenge linked in the description or pinned comment, not as a hustle, not as a promise of quick results, but as a container, a rhythm, to help the nervous system learn a new normal. And now, without pause, we continue. Because what comes next is subtle, and it matters. There will be moments, quiet ones, where the external world appears unchanged, and the old voice will say, "Nothing is happening." But understand this deeply. Nothing is happening is a perception, not a fact. Rearrangement happens in silence. Seeds do not announce themselves. Foundations are not visible. Alignment does not make noise. The moment you truly understand this, impatience loses its grip. You stop measuring progress by appearance and start measuring it by internal consistency. Are you still reacting the same way? Are you still telling the same story? Are you still bracing for the same outcomes? If not, everything is already moving. And here is the turning point few ever articulate. Reality does not change when you believe harder. It changes when believing becomes unnecessary. When the end feels so natural that you forget you once wanted it. That forgetting is not neglect, it is embodiment. And embodiment is creation completed internally. From there, the world simply catches up. In the next movement, we will cross into the most delicate threshold of all, the moment where identity fully releases the old narrative and the impossible loses its emotional charge entirely. When that happens, desire stops feeling like pursuit and starts feeling like memory. And once you touch that, you will understand why Neville said the wish fulfilled is not something you get, it is something you remember yourself as. There is a quiet moment, often unnoticed, when the old story loses its grip. Not because you fought it, not because you replaced it thought by thought, but because it no longer feels relevant. This is the moment identity begins to shift. And identity is everything. You never experience life as it is. You experience life as who you believe you are. Not intellectually, viscerally. Identity is the lens through which reality organizes itself around you. When identity changes, reality does not resist. It reorganizes. This is why Neville emphasized being, not doing. Why he insisted that consciousness is the only reality. Because what you are determines what feels possible, natural, inevitable. And here is the subtle truth most never hear clearly. You do not manifest what you want. You manifest what belongs to the identity you occupy. This is why effort fails and alignment succeeds. When identity remains unchanged, desire feels distant. When identity shifts, desire feels obvious. And the shift does not happen with declarations alone. It happens when the internal dialogue changes tone. Notice this carefully. The old identity speaks in arguments, in justifications, in conditions. If only. When this happens, as long as. The new identity speaks in assumptions, quiet ones. It does not announce itself. It does not convince others. It does not even convince the mind. It simply operates. You begin to think thoughts that surprise you, calmer thoughts, steadier ones. You interpret events differently. You respond instead of react. You stop personalizing delays, and suddenly, without effort, you are no longer the same person waiting for change. You are the person through whom change moves. This is where the impossible loses its emotional weight. It no longer feels dramatic. It no longer feels charged. It no longer defines you. It becomes neutral. And neutrality is power, because what no longer triggers you no longer controls you. This is also where desire transforms. It stops feeling like lack and starts feeling like recognition. You don't chase it. You don't rehearse it. You don't constantly return to it. You trust it, not as a future event, but as a present alignment. And trust is not passive. Trust is rest. Rest from inner conflict. Rest from bargaining. Rest from mental rehearsal. Rest signals completion. And completion internally always precedes completion externally. This is why the final phase often feels strangely ordinary. You wake up one day and realize you are no longer thinking about the thing the same way. Not because you gave up, but because you no longer need to hold it tightly. You've already received it internally. And now, something subtle but irreversible happens. Your reactions stop feeding the old world. You no longer energize the version of reality built on waiting, doubting, proving. And because energy is attention, and attention sustains states, the old world begins to dissolve, not with conflict, with irrelevance. This is why manifestation is not a battle, it is a migration. You don't destroy the old state, you leave it. And states that are no longer occupied cannot persist. Now here is where the teaching becomes truly liberating. You realize that nothing outside you needs to change for you to change where you live internally. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for signs. You don't wait for reassurance. You decide where reality is sourced from, and decision in consciousness is placement. You place yourself in the end, not as fantasy, not as pretending, but as orientation. You orient your thoughts, emotions, and self-concept from the position of fulfillment, and the world, precise, obedient, neutral, adjusts. This is where many people finally understand Neville's most radical implication. There is no opponent, no universe testing you, no external force withholding, no timing working against you, only states and your movement between them. And once this is seen, guilt disappears. You stop blaming yourself for doing it wrong. You stop criticizing your mind for wandering. You stop fearing setbacks. You simply return, again and again, to the state that feels most like home. And here is something important to notice now. Home does not feel exciting. Home feels familiar. That familiarity is the sign you are close. When the end begins to feel obvious rather than extraordinary, you are standing in the right place. And from there, the final piece clicks into place. You realize you are not here to force reality to obey you. You are here to choose who you are and let reality reflect that choice. Choice at this level is not verbal, it is existential. It is how you carry yourself internally, how you interpret moments, how you allow emotions to pass without building stories around them. And when choice stabilizes, identity locks in. Now pause with me one more time. Ask yourself, gently, honestly, who would I be right now if this were already resolved? Not what would I do, not what would change externally. Who would I be? How would I feel in my body? How would my mind rest? How would I move through today? Let the answer arise without forcing it. That answer is not imagination, it is instruction. And following it, quietly, is the final doorway. In the last movement of this journey, we will step into the most misunderstood truth of all. Why the end never feels like an ending. Why manifestation is not closure, and why the fulfilled state actually opens something larger than the desire itself. Because what you are remembering now is not just how to receive, it is who you are when you stop asking life for permission to exist fully. There is a final misunderstanding that dissolves only at the deepest level of this work. It is the belief that manifestation has an ending, that once the desire appears, the journey is complete, that fulfillment is a closing chapter. But the truth is quieter and far more expansive. The end you assume is never the end of life. It is the end of seeking from separation. When the desire materializes, what truly arrives is not the object, the situation, or the outcome. What arrives is confirmation of who you are. And once that confirmation is integrated, something remarkable happens. You no longer define yourself by what you want. You define yourself by what flows naturally through you. This is why those who truly understand this law stop chasing bigger and bigger desires out of lack. They allow desires to emerge organically, as expressions, not compensations. They don't ask, "How can I get more?" They sense, "What wants to move through me next?" And that is a completely different orientation to life. Because now, desire is no longer a cry for completion. It is an invitation to expansion. This is why the fulfilled state never feels like fireworks forever. It feels like grounded openness, a subtle readiness, a calm curiosity, a trust that whatever arises can be inhabited and therefore expressed. And here is the final liberation. You realize that the power was never in the technique, never in the words, never in the repetition. The power was always in your willingness to relocate identity, to stop living as the one who waits and begin living as the one who allows outcomes to form, allows paths to reveal themselves, allows life to meet you halfway, not because you demand it, but because you finally stand where it can reach you. This is the moment where effort dissolves completely. You no longer try to hold the state holds you. You move through days with less friction, less inner negotiation, less emotional resistance. And even when challenges appear, because life continues to move, they no longer threaten your identity. They are just weather. You don't collapse back into old stories. You don't question your worth. You don't panic. You respond from depth. And this is how you know the work is integrated. Not by what you manifest, but by how little you fear losing alignment. Because alignment no longer feels fragile. It feels inherent. And now, gently, something extraordinary becomes obvious. You were never here to prove this law. You were here to remember yourself through it, to remember that consciousness precedes form, that identity governs experience, that assumption is not pretending, it is positioning. And once remembered, this understanding does not leave you, it deepens. Every new desire becomes easier to assume. Every former impossibility feels lighter. Every delay feels less personal. You stop dramatizing time. You stop interpreting pauses as rejection. You stop asking, "Why not yet?" Because yet loses meaning when you live from completion. And this is where the journey truly continues, not ends. You carry this posture into conversations, into decisions, into silence. You stop needing reassurance from the world because you recognize its behavior. You know it is always catching up, always adjusting, always reflecting. And if you listen closely now, beyond the words, you may notice something subtle inside you, a steadiness, a calm confidence that does not announce itself, a sense that nothing essential is missing. That feeling is not temporary, it is familiar. It is what you feel when you stop outsourcing authority and reclaim your place as the origin point. And from this place, you don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to argue with doubt. You don't need to rush. You simply live, and life responds. If this message resonates, not as information but as recognition, you may choose to stay close to it, not out of obligation, not out of habit, but as an alignment, a quiet decision to continue walking this path of awareness, of assumption, of conscious creation. And if you feel that pull, you already know what to do, not as a subscription, but as a choice to remain in conversation with the part of you that remembers. Because this is not a channel, it is a mirror. And every time you return, you don't come back to learn something new. You come back to remember who you already are. And that remembering, once begun, does not fade, it expands.